So good afternoon to those in the UK. Hopefully you've had a hearty lunch as we proceed to the rest of the workshop. And also good morning or evening to those who may be beyond the UK. So we want to have a nice outreach here. I'm Sanjiv Mahajan. I work in the Office for National Statistics in the UK as the head of methods and research, and I do a lot of liaison with ESCoE and its researchers on various projects we've commissioned. Just to start this afternoon, briefly from my view, in the past, the interest and demand for regional and micro statistics has always been sort of rather cyclical, including the policy interest, supported by lots of reports and recommendations. Today, I think is different. From the work I've seen on global value chains, national value chains, they're breaking down. Businesses are rapidly changing their operations, models, supply chains, functions, etc. And this is collectively going to have a huge impact on the UK in terms of the nation and the regions themselves. I think the variety of work with the presentations today is a flavour of the responses to date and where we are. But then when we take a step back and look at the impact of COVID, then on top of that, Brexit, devolution, the levelling up agenda, etc. Cumulatively, I think this is going to possibly remove some of the cyclical nature in the past and maybe generate an insatiable demand for micro and regional statistics on a continual basis, and not just statistics, but timely, granular, and higher quality. We've got two presentations in this session. The first one will be Jess Burchell, and the second one, Andrew Carter. ONS has responded very well in different ways in the past year to the COVID-19 pandemic, ranging from lots of new analyses, use of faster indicators, lots of information you see regularly on deaths, but also we've put together some new business surveys and statistics. So I'm going to hand over now to Jess for the first presentation linked to the business surveys. Jess, if you want to unmute yourself, and away we go. Thank you.
Hopefully you should all be able to see my slides now. So, good morning. My name is Jess Burchell and I work on the Business Insights and Conditions Survey at the Office for National Statistics. This morning, I'm going to be sharing our latest insights into the business impacts of local and national restrictions. These insights will revolve around our key headline estimates, trading status, what percentage of single site businesses are currently trading and how this varies across regions, workforce, how the proportion of single site businesses workforce on furlough leave varies across region, and financial performance, how the percentage of single site businesses experiencing a decrease in turnover compared to normal expectations this time of year varies across regions. But first, I'll explain a thing or two about BICS. So, the ONS implemented the Business Insights and Conditions Survey, BICS, in a matter of weeks, where traditionally the creation of a new survey can take 6 to 12 months. During a time of great uncertainty, it was essential to provide quick and coherent data on the impact of the pandemic, with data being used in real time by decision makers to identify the strategies needed to respond to the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on UK economy and society. The voluntary fortnightly business survey has provided qualitative information on turnover, workforce, prices and trade, which has offered further insights around these business dynamics. Final results of each wave of BICS are published in the fortnightly bulletin, Business Insights and Impact on the UK Economy, and flash headline figures are presented in the weekly Coronavirus and the Latest Indicators for UK Economy and Society publication. The survey was originally called Business Impact of COVID-19 Survey, which was chosen in March 2020 with no understanding of how long the pandemic would last or the impact the data collected from it would have on policymakers, government departments and users. In Wave 24, February of this year, the name was changed to the Business Insights and Conditions Survey, as questions in the survey expanded to topics outside the scope of the pandemic. The sample size has increased over the waves to improve the coverage of regions and different business sizes, to ensure the sample is more representative of all UK businesses. From Wave 17 onwards, our sample is over 39,000 businesses. The subnational BICS estimates use a single site approach to produce regional estimates. This is based on businesses which report having only one single business site on the IDBR. This is done to avoid making assumptions about businesses with multiple sites. As the data collected by BICS is qualitative and is only responded to by reporting units of the business, it is not possible to make assumptions about it or the local units of that business based on the data. So, for example, Wetherspoons has numerous sites across the UK. BICS collects data from its reporting unit in, say, London. It would not be possible to make assumptions that what is reported by the Wetherspoons in London is also true for example, Manchester or Glasgow. However, based on the single site methodology, approximately 98% of all UK businesses are covered in the sample. Limitations of this methodology are that although 98% of all UK businesses are covered in the sample, it only covers 50% of total UK turnover and total workforce employment. Additionally, estimates are only available from wave 18 onwards. There is data available from 14 to 17, but the quality of data improved from wave 18 onwards after an increase in sample size. The latest indicators predominantly focus on wave 27 to wave 30 of BICS, covering the period 8th of March to 16th of May as coronavirus restrictions were relaxed across all 4 UK countries. It also focuses on the services sector, which saw significant changes in results during this time. So, whilst the single site methodology presented here does account for approximately 98% of all UK businesses in the sample, it is reliant, like all surveys, on responses. On average, BICS has an average response rate of 25.5% for all UK businesses from wave 18 to wave 30. The average response rate for single site businesses is 23.2%. This table shows the response rates for all UK businesses and then the UK single site businesses for wave 30 broken down by regions. It shows that the response rates can vary from 16% in Northern Ireland to 27% in the Southwest. This should be kept in mind when interpreting the results of single site BICS subnational estimates, and it is caveated within our article. Okay, so trading status, focusing on businesses currently trading. In early May 2021, Wales, which is the red line, had the highest percentage of single site businesses currently trading at 87%. Meanwhile, Scotland, the green line, had the lowest percentage of single site businesses currently trading at 78%. This is probably reflective of the fact that Wales relaxed its coronavirus restrictions at an earlier date than Scotland. For comparison, across all UK single site businesses and all UK businesses, both of which are approximately in line with the light blue line, 83% of businesses currently trading at this time. From late March to early May 2021, as coronavirus restrictions were relaxed, all 4 UK countries saw an increase in the percentage of single site businesses currently trading. Wales saw the largest increase, increasing by 15 percentage points, while England saw the smallest increase, increasing by 8 percentage points. At the UK level, the services sector increased by 11 percentage points from late March to early May as coronavirus restrictions were relaxed. In early May, Northern Ireland had the highest percentage of single site businesses currently trading in the services sector at 89%. And as you can see on the graph, we've also included the hospitality sector, which is an additional subsection of the services sector. And in early May, the East Midlands had the highest percentage of single site businesses currently trading in the hospitality sector at 79%. Moving on to the proportion of businesses' workforce on furlough leave. So in late April, Scotland, which is the green line, had the highest proportion of single site businesses' workforce on furlough leave at 14%. Scotland has consistently had the highest proportion of its workforce on furlough leave since early November 2020. Meanwhile, Northern Ireland, which is the yellow line, had the lowest proportion of its single site businesses on workforce on furlough leave at 10%. Northern Ireland has consistently had the lowest proportion of its workforce on furlough leave since early November 2020. For a comparison, across all UK single sites, which is approximately in line with the light blue line, 12% of the workforce were on furlough leave at this time, whilst across all UK businesses, which is the dark blue line, 10% of the workforce was on furlough leave. From early March to late April, as restrictions were relaxed across all 4 UK countries, all countries saw a fall in the proportion of their workforce on furlough leave. Scotland saw the largest fall, decreasing by 6 percentage points, whilst Wales saw the smallest fall, decreasing by 2 percentage points. So at the UK level, the services sector fell by 5 percentage points from early March to late April as restrictions were relaxed. In late April, the South West had the lowest proportion of its single-site businesses' workforce on furlough leave in the services sector at 10%. In addition, the South West also had the lowest proportion of its single-site businesses' workforce on furlough leave in the hospitality sector at 39%. Okay, so moving on to financial performance, focusing on businesses that have experienced a decrease in turnover compared to normal expectations for this time of year. So, in late April, Wales, which is the red line, had the highest percentage of single-site businesses experiencing a decrease in turnover at 37%. Meanwhile, Northern Ireland, which is the yellow line, had the lowest percentage of single-site businesses experiencing a decrease in turnover at 27%. Northern Ireland has consistently had the lowest percentage of single-site businesses experiencing a decrease in turnover since early November 2020. For comparison, across all UK single-site businesses and all UK businesses, both of which are approximately in line with the light blue line, 34% of businesses were experiencing a decrease in turnover. From early March to late April, as coronavirus restrictions were relaxed, all 4 UK countries saw a fall in the percentage of their single-site businesses experiencing a decrease in turnover. Northern Ireland saw the largest fall, decreasing by 8 percentage points, while Wales saw the smallest fall, decreasing by 3 percentage points. At the UK level, the services sector fell by 4 percentage points from early March to late April as coronavirus restrictions were relaxed. The North West had the lowest percentage of single-site businesses experiencing a decrease in turnover at 23% in late April 2021. The North East also had the lowest percentage of single-site businesses experiencing a decrease in turnover in the hospitality sector at 47%. So to summarise the data from our latest indicators, all 4 UK countries saw an increase in the percentage of single-site businesses currently trading from late March to early May 2021 as coronavirus restrictions were relaxed. Wales had the highest percentage of single-site businesses currently trading in early May at 87%. Scotland has consistently had the highest proportion of its workforce on furlough leave since early November 2020, while Northern Ireland had consistently had the lowest percentage of its single-site businesses experiencing a decrease in turnover since early November 2020. In addition to the graphs shown in this presentation, within our Understanding the Business Impacts of Local and National Restrictions article, we also have an interactive map which allows users to explore how businesses impact differ by geography based on wave 30 of BICS. And I'd strongly recommend going and have a look. So the future of BICS subnational estimates. Our next publication is currently has the provisional date of the 20th of July. This is due to be confirmed shortly, and this will cover data up to wave 34 of BICS, which will be up to the beginning of July 2021. The plan is then to continue to have this article every 8 to 10 weeks, being published on a Tuesday after the publication of our regular bulletin on a Thursday. There are methodological developments going on in the background at the moment to investigate the ability to produce regional estimates for all UK businesses, not just those with a single site on the IGBR. As described at the beginning of the presentation, this is more difficult, and so business data would have to be experimental with caveats. I cannot confirm at this moment when this data is expected to become available, but it is in the process, and we're working with the ONS methodology department to produce these. Okay. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Thank you very much for that, Jess. I encourage people to use the question and answer box to tap in their question, and then we can give you the floor as appropriate. I haven't got any questions so far, but in the meantime, what I'll do is, as you hastily tap in those boxes, I just want to sort of emphasize a little bit of the background first, based on what Jess has described. The backdrop obviously was considerable as a shock to the system in terms of the economy. And as statistical producers, massive challenges. So how this survey was put together with speed should be definitely be recognised and as something very different. It was also a voluntary survey. Now, voluntary, some people don't really necessarily always appreciate. ONS operates lots of voluntary surveys, ad hoc surveys, but a lot of surveys are mandatory in order to achieve the outputs that we do. But at the same time, you've got to remember businesses were going bust. They were being closed down. Businesses were being closed down where there was no contacts, etc., which obviously is very key to our job in terms of getting data back and validating and verifying what's going on. And businesses may not have welcomed a statistical office sending out surveys, asking for questions in such sensitive and difficult times. So whilst I'm watching some questions materialize, one I will put to Jess. Could she say, maybe briefly describe some of the experience, some of the issues that occurred with such a backdrop in running the survey? Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. So because it is a voluntary survey, our response rate is potentially lower than average, but it has been consistent across the entire time that BICS has run. BICS recently had its 1-year anniversary, and we have consistently always had at least 20% of businesses responding. We have increased our sample significantly over the time in order to produce weighted results for all businesses and then weighted results for single site regional businesses. It can be a challenge, but so far businesses have responded well, and we are consistently getting the data, and we have not experienced any problems so far.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jess. As we've got time, I'm now going to start to go through the questions, and they're starting to come through, which is nice. I encourage others to do so as well. Firstly, we're going to ask Margaret McAvoy if she wants to unmute herself. Just making sure we can get that done. And if you can ask your question, Margaret.
Yes, thank you. Very good presentation, Jess, and very interesting. I just wonder if you could say something about the businesses which experienced an increase in turnover over the period. How much information did you collect on that?
So that is available. It's not within this presentation and is not presented within the article due to limitations with word counts and things like that. However, alongside our article, we do publish very large data sets, which do include information on businesses that have experienced an increase in turnover even. So this can be found alongside our data within the ONS website.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jess. Next, I'm looking for Marianne Sensia to unmute and go ahead with your question, please. Marianne?
Hi, yes, very interesting presentation, and thank you very much to the Office for National Statistics to responding so quickly, because people who are looking at regional economies and trying to understand them, your business surveys have been really useful. But just a point of clarification on your decreasing turnover. So I think you said Northern Ireland was the highest. So did that mean that businesses were recovering quicker or slower? Sorry, I just didn't quite get the point.
That's okay. So Northern Ireland has the lowest. We're not in a position to say what that means, because we are a voluntary survey, and we wait the result. It sort of says what it does on the tin. It suggests that Northern Ireland have had a lower percentage of businesses experiencing a decrease in turnover. To investigate this fully, I'd recommend having a look at the data I spoke about in the previous question, because within this question, businesses can respond that their turnover has increased, decreased, or not been affected. So that would be an interesting comparison to see if Northern Ireland, as a result of having a low percentage saying that they're experiencing a decrease in turnover, whether that's then reflective in them having an increase in turnover, or whether more are just saying that their turnover has not been affected. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. And can I just ask another thing about, at the beginning they're saying there's barely any business failures this year because of COVID and various companies kind of taking furlough rather than going out of business. Is that still the case, or have those births and deaths of businesses statistics started changing? Yeah. Or is that, sorry, this may be completely outside of this, this survey.
Within the BICS team, we are having a look at the data on businesses that have reported permanently ceased trading. That is at an all businesses level rather than a regional level. And we aim to be putting something regarding that within our bulletin shortly. I cannot confirm whether we will be looking at this at a regional point of view at the moment. But again, that data is within our data sets. If you wanted to go have a look yourselves, I'd just say again about the caveats regarding potential fluctuations due to the number of businesses responding and things like that.
Great, thanks.
Thanks for that, Jeff. And thanks for the question, Marianne. I think just I would add something else on that, because obviously geographically Northern Ireland is slightly separated with even more water than the UK as a whole. It may well be the composition and the structure of the businesses, their relationship to trade and their relationship to the consumers. If that construct is slightly different from, say, Scotland and England and Wales, which I can understand, then you would maybe think they're a bit more resilient to the impact of what occurred. That's hypothetical, but it may well be the composition of the businesses and their relationship to the consumers of their outputs. Thank you very much for that. I'll move on to Joseph Haynes. If you want to unmute yourself while you do that, I'm encouraging any others to ask more questions.
Yeah, hi, just a quick question on, I think you had a slide on the survey response, which showed Northern Ireland was quite a bit lower than most of the other regions in the UK. It was around 16% and the others were 25 to 30%. I just wondered if there was a reason for why it was so much lower in Northern Ireland, and if that's something that's seen across many surveys by the ONS.
We are looking into this. I don't think we have a direct answer to that question. Overall, we have a smaller sample in Northern Ireland, particularly regarding the number of single site businesses. This is why we encourage people to use Wave 18 data onwards, because although within our data sets we do have Wave 14 to 17 data, the response rates, particularly for smaller regions such as Northern Ireland, are much lower. I unfortunately do not have an answer for you about why they might be that much lower compared to other regions, but we do talk regularly with Northern Ireland businesses to encourage them to fill out our survey.
Okay, just another thought there, because obviously Northern Ireland businesses are used to responding to the statistical body within Northern Ireland, and it could be something that now all of a sudden they're getting a request from the ONS, they may view differently. Is it part or is it linked? Is it an overlap, etc.? So it's just a thought, because obviously there's a way of working within Northern Ireland which, as a response to this survey, we had to do things differently. It's a possibility. Okay, so there's no more questions to Jess, so I think Jess can relax and have an early afternoon glass of wine, as the case may be. So we'll now swiftly move over to Andrew Carter, who's out from the Centre of Cities. Andrew, would you like to unmute yourself and put yourself on video, and off we go.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Let me share my slide. Okay, can you see that, Sanjiv?
I can. I just want to check, is it on full screen? Yes, it is. Okay, excellent.
Excellent, thank you very much indeed. So I've been asked to say a little bit about the work that we've been doing during the pandemic, trying to track the performance of city and large town economies. I'm going to focus a little bit about what we've been doing and why. Some of the data I'm going to show is bang up to date, so you can reflect on what's actually happening. Some of it is a little bit out of date, but I'm just using it to illustrate what we've been working on, and then the implications of that. Obviously, we can pick up in the Q&A if you wish. As I say, I think everybody's saying during this period, what I'm presenting is not perfect. We don't claim it to be perfect, and we make revisions along the way as our understanding of the data and how we might better use it develops as well. But hopefully, on the feedback from our city leaders, who primarily focused on cities and city leaders or town leaders, is that it's been useful, but we see it as a complement rather than a substitute for other data and insights. So that's the sort of bit of caveat around it. And this is a familiar issue for many on the call and elsewhere, that when we look at when we're looking at city or town economies, we're looking often into the past. It's not a criticism of the brilliant work that the ONS have been doing during the pandemic and before. It's just a simple state of the fact that much of the data, not all of it, but much of the data at the city level or at the local authority level is 1 or 2 years out of date, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, which is fine, not great, but fine during normal times, but less so obviously when you're in the situation we've gone through in the last 18 months, where everything is changing quite rapidly. We're constantly looking at and gathering data across 30 or so indicators on some of the themes that are on your on the screen. And interestingly, when you talk to cities and leaders that we do all the time, that they want to know how their place is getting on and how their place is performing, but they also want to know how their place compares to other places. So there's a kind of absolute performance question as well as a relative performance question, and we try to use ways to illustrate that, and you can see that as the image illustrating the performance of Reading across a number of indicators. Further out is better, further in is worse, compared to somewhere like Hull, and obviously Reading's economy across a number of different indicators performs much more strongly than Hull. So it's trying to give a comparative perspective as well as an absolute perspective is what we're focused on. So this isn't really in relation to the economy, but we started by trying to decided to track COVID cases as they were emerging and increasing in our cities and large towns. We took that decision early on in March of 2020, and how we've done that and the way that we've visualized that has been iterated through the process as the pandemic has changed, and indeed has data has become available, and the way that it's been presented itself has changed, and we're using a lot of the data that Public Health England have been rolling out over those sorts of periods. but we decided to keep an eye on what was going on in cases. And what that did early on, from a policy point of view, was to be able to do some work and contribute to a degree on the debate that, if you remember, going back to March and April of 2020, was the degree to which density was a significant or not factor in the way that the virus was transmitting and growing. And we were able to show to a degree, and others have done further work, which we haven't, that density was a factor. You can see that cases were going up and were increasing in places that were more dense. But actually, what was interesting when we did that bit of analysis, that was primarily driven by the London boroughs. Once you took the London boroughs out, which this graph does, you can see the relationship between density and COVID cases at the time, going back to 23rd of March 2020, was much less strong of a relationship. So again, just by capturing and working on the COVID cases allows us to say something about, in those early stages, the role of and the significance of density as a means of transmission. We also early on took a decision to track the performance or in our town and city centres. So not the cities and towns that we look at, and these are all the places that we look at across the country on the map, but actually to focus very specifically on the towns and city centres. And we did that, and we started that process in March 2020, and then we've done it continually throughout. So at least every month, but the data comes through to us on a weekly basis, we're updating the performance of our cities and towns centres using two metrics. One is footfall, so those that are going into the city or town centre on a weekly basis, or into the city or town centre, and from a spend point of view. So on the footfall, we're using location-based mobile phone data linked to apps, so we can see where people are coming from, but also where they're going into the town and city centre, and I'll say a little bit more about that. And then on spend, we're using card, credit and debit card transaction data in stores, sort of, or in places, so it's all offline rather than online, as it were, to track some of the performance. And the two tables you can see are the most up to date. So what we've done there is benchmark every place to its position in February 2020, and then essentially we track performance. So Blackpool footfall is at 95% of what it was in February 2020, whereas in places somewhere like London, you can see that it's down at 38, so much lower than that. So just to focus a little bit more on footfall first, just to take you through some slides on that. So this is I've just randomly picked Leeds, no other reason. So you can have this data for all of the 63 urban areas that we're looking at, but basically you can see then what the period of time, and on the left hand you can see that's the overall index, so that's footfall, and that's the line chart going up and down, squiggly and such, and on the right hand is the spend index, and you can see again, the bar charts of the blue show you how spend has fluctuated throughout. And what you can see there is also, because we're doing it over the period, you can see some of the effects that the restriction easing and then reintroduction of those restrictions at various points through the cycle how they've had an effect on spend and indeed on footfall. So that gives us a little bit of an insight then as to how different places are impacted by, obviously, the initial lockdown, which is quite significant for every place, but then varying degrees of recovery as we go through. And obviously the data that we are using, because it's finer grained, it allows us to be much more flexible, so we can identify relatively smallish geographies and then think about capturing the data as it relates to those. The other advantage that the data that we're using has is that it allows us to subdivide the individuals or the persons or the mobile phones coming into those areas. And what we've been able to do here is identify those people that are essentially what we call a kind of workers index. So those that are coming in during the working week hours, spending the majority of time in their town or city centre during that working period, so for between the hours of 8 and 6, and that they're in those places on a majority basis in terms of days of the week. We're in the process of refining the workers index, so hopefully as we go forward we'll be able to pick up the sort of hybrid working model and how that might work in, and what that might look like in different places. But that's something that we're just working on at the minute. But it allows us to sort of say, look, when you look at Leeds, you can see before the pandemic, lots of workers in there during the working week, and obviously a significant drop off once we get into April 2020, and actually very little recovery over the subsequent period. But then when you compare it to weekend and evening, so weekend at the top, nighttime at the bottom, again, you can see, I'm just using it for Leeds, you can see the kind of different performances of, or the different trajectory of recovery, whereas at the weekend, slightly higher, and particularly as we get into the summer period of last year, and similarly with the nighttime as well. So it gives us some insights, hopefully, for our leaders, thinking about not only how their town and city centres have been impacted, but in what way are they were recovering, and in different ways as well, which is hopefully useful to them. What that enabled us to do when we then combine it with previous and existing analysis that we've done, for example, this is one illustration of it, is to show that when we looked at the analysis, that the overall recovery that we were seeing is weakest in some of our big office hubs. I talked about Leeds, you can see that on the chart, but also Manchester and London, telling us something about the fact that if you look at those places, they were big office hubs before the pandemic, but they also had a high number of workers that could essentially and did work from home. So they took their jobs and went home. Obviously, they don't live in the city centre, so they withdraw from the city centre. They're not coming back in any significant way. That has then a knock-on effect for those sort of hospitality, entertainment, retail workers that rely on the office workers, who then themselves are not coming into the city centre. So it tells us, again, gives us some illustrations about, again, not only the nature of the impact, but actually getting under the skin of that, and then what that means for the implications as we unlock. In a sense, one of the big implications, unknowns really, is what's the nature and shape of office return, and how that will play out in places like Manchester, Leeds, London, Reading, Cardiff, etc., which is a disproportionately different challenge compared to places like Birkenhead or Basildon, which don't have significant numbers of office workers that have taken their work home. That's not the role that their city or town centres play. So it gives us, again, an insight into debates that are ongoing really about the nature and shape of the recovery. Our analysis also allowed us at that point to explore another aspect that has been much debated and continues to be debated, which is when you look at our kind of big cities. This is Greater Manchester. How is Manchester city centre recovering vis-a-vis the towns, centres around it? This is again going back a few months, but again it allows us to illustrate and give some numbers to, or at least some sense of how Bolton, Bury, Rochdale, etc. Were performing relative to Manchester. Again, a very live policy debate about the nature of the economic geography, particularly of our bigger cities, and how that might evolve and change over time as working from home, hybrid working, more flexible working, etc. Plays out, and where that ultimately settles in the national economy. So I showed a little bit earlier on about spend, and as I said, at the point that the spend tracker is capturing offline spend, so card transactions in the place rather than online. But we've also then been able to do some analysis with the provider of the data, an organisation called Beauclair, where we're also been able to give a picture about how spending patterns online have changed. Again, we all know, big debate about the extent to which online has increased as an overall share, and again, using debit and credit card transaction data, you can see again how the patterns have changed both before but also during. Again, so we're benchmarking light green to February 2020, and then we're looking through till September 2020, the increase that we've seen in online spending and how that's gone up. So places like Cambridge, you can see an increase now. It's the kind of biggest online place. But also significant increases across other places as well. And again, contributing to hopefully a policy conversation about the role of online vis-a-vis offline spending and what that means, I suppose, for our town centres. And as always, we've been able to, because of the data and the way that we cut it and analyse it, again, you can look at how that varies between different places. I've just picked, again, randomly Hull and London, and you can see if you look at London, obviously lower in-store, the purple bar is lower, which partly reflects the point I was making earlier on, in the sense that there are fewer people in the town centre physically spending, making card transactions in there, even if online London is higher than it previously was. So again, it gives some insights into that. The final area just to touch on is some of the work that we've been doing on the labour market and trying to capture how the labour market has responded. We've used we've been doing quite a bit of work on claimant count data, obviously, timely, available at low, small geographies, so allows us to do some of that fine-grained, more timely analysis, and that's really helpful to get a grip on how the labour market is changing. Obviously, claimant count, has some caveats associated with it, but it's a good indicator to think about how labour markets are responding. We've also been mapping and analysing some of the work in relation to the jobs retention scheme, or the furlough scheme, and how that's kind of changed again. This is more up to date data and how that varies across the country. And not criticism, I understand there were many other kind of things, there was a bit of a slowness in terms of making JRS data available at the local authority level, but now we have it, and we've had it on a fairly consistent basis, which is really excellent, really allows us to get at some of the issues. And again, the map and the two tables show you the places, the cities and towns across the country with highest and lowest JRS as it currently is. And you can look at places like Crawley and Slough, with still big numbers on JRS, partly to do with the fact that they're overly reliant on the aviation industry directly and indirectly for employment, and surprisingly, you see sort of big numbers still on furlough in relation to that, as well as other places as well. So really interesting and good work on jobs retention, really additional insight into helping to understand what's going on in terms of the labour market, and also tracking change over time. This is not bang up to date, it's just to illustrate the point that not only can we show and see where Crawley currently is, but you can see a cumulative, at any point in time, or whatever the point, the cumulative basis of, cumulatively more than 40% of the workforce eligible have been on furlough at some point in Crawley, as well as other places. So you can again see how things are evolving and changing over time. And that's, again, I just randomly picked 5 or so places to look at. Because we have the data over that time period, we're also able to show how places compare, or how they're performing themselves, but how they compare to other places as well. As I said right at the start, places want to know how how they're getting on, but they also want to know how they compare to other places. So giving them some sense as to how they do compare. And as I said, all the data is available for all the places that we're looking at. I just picked out these places for no particular reason, but again, you can see and compare and change over time. And then the final bit of analysis that we've been working with Indeed with, the labour market jobs data company, is to keep an eye on jobs postings as a kind of proxy measure for labour demands. We're kind of thinking about issues on the, we will also look at job postings as a kind of some measure of the strength of demand in different places. And again, looking at benchmark to February 2020, how the demand of the jobs postings have evolved and changed over time. Again, this is the latest data available, and it shows, a recovery in some places like Middlesbrough, Hull, and Stoke, and elsewhere, but then significant and still weakness in some places like Aldershot and Slough. So again, a real sense of a variation on the way that the pandemic has played out, and it continues to play out over time, which I think raises implications for a whole host of policy questions and issues, which obviously at the centre of the cities and others we ultimately care about, which is, so what does that mean for the wind down of furlough? What does that mean for provision of labour market support, skills support for people who are either out of work or may well be out of work relatively shortly, helping them get back in, but what's the state of the economy in which they are trying to find kind of work. And we've also done more work, which is available on our website, looking at some of the industries where jobs posting relates to different industries as well, to get a handle on what's going on in different places and how that might play out. And again, this is just job posting, similar grouping most of places, and again you can compare how different places have been affected and then are recovering to varying degrees over the time period that the data is available. And again, we're updating all of this on a monthly basis as the data comes in from the various data companies that we are working with. So, and finally, I suppose a kind of point around what it allows us to do, I think, is provide a more rounded view then to policymakers about what's going on in their labour markets at that sort of local level. On the left hand here, I've got furlough scheme take up at the end of April, and then job postings on the right hand, claim and count in March, and job postings as well, just so we can begin to try to unpick some of the relationships and the analysis, but ultimately to try and provide a more rounded picture as to what's going on in places. Ultimately, as I said, with the view to analyse it and to providing useful insight that can be used by policymakers in the short term, but also in the longer term as they think about the recovery of their place as the economy opens and hopefully the pandemic recedes. So that was a kind of quick run through of some of the data that we've been working on. As I said, the primary aim has been to use the analysis to identify what we can do in a sort of timely perspective, show them kind of what's going on in their place and how it compares to other places, and then give them some insights as to what that means for policy interventions in the short term and in the longer term. Just to reiterate, it's not perfect. We don't claim it's perfect, but it's subject to revisions and hopefully improvements as we go forward, but nevertheless hopefully useful. So I will hand back to Sanjiv.
Thank you very much for that, Andrew. Very insightful presentation and bringing together various data sources to create greater enrichment. I did like to pick up on the point before I continue. Firstly, I'm encouraging people to use the QA to ask any questions. Don't be shy, don't be bashful. Andrew's a nice guy. I like to draw out the way you describe the past, present and future, and I think it's really important. I think with Jess's presentation and yours, it's clearly bringing forward. It's difficult to measure the future. Let's not worry about that. it's difficult to measure the past, but we've been doing that for years, good, bad, or indifferent. But we've now got this present and that real-time dimension, a lot of focus on that. That's quite important. And then when you talked about Leeds, I know Leeds has got a very good nightlife. I've experienced it on a few occasions. And Leeds is reliant not just on business and offices, etc. It's reliant on a huge tourism, nightlife, weekend trends, etc. It'd be interesting to see what happens when people change their taste. Instead of going into cities, I mean, Bradford's not far, but where I'm thinking there will be a change in taste will be things like the Ridings or Pudsey, etc. And will we be able to have material that tracks the change in taste and change in trend, whether it's the footfall numbers, etc.? So that's one sort of question I have to you. Do you think you can sort of hone in on that present real-time scenario? Another one is, when you did the labour stuff and jobs, obviously there's a lot of information on the types of jobs and the change in trend of the types of jobs linked to the vacancies that materialize. So if we looked at the top 10 jobs 10 years ago, most of them probably didn't exist or existed in very different forms, you know, cybersecurity, software publishing, web design, web publication, all the way through to even conference hosting facilities as such. So do you think there's mileage, or you may be considering in your future plans of more granular information to pick up such trends? And I'm still waiting for questions. I think maybe people are a bit shy this afternoon, but
it's the post-lunch stupor, Sanjiv, you know, where the belly is full and the eyelids are heavy, right? I mean,
they wouldn't be doing that if I was standing in front of them.
Well, not quite, but you know, there we go, right? You know, remote stuff is good for some things, but you can't beat face to face. I mean, you know,
the point is
maybe there's something on that. You know, no, you raise some great points. So, I do think, I mean, I'm sure others would have said this as well. Just on your broader point that you started with, I think there is an interesting one. Leeds is a good example. So, you know, by all metrics, most metrics, you would say Leeds before the pandemic was a relatively successful, vibrant, dynamic place. Its economy was strengthening over time. It was evolving over time. But really, you know, you were thinking about that as, you know, on the up, as it were, very crudely. But I think it's also fair to say, you know, you saw some of the data, you know, it's also had a good wallop during the pandemic, in a sense, particularly the town and city centre. And I suppose one of the things we need to be careful about is to try and be careful about the degree to which those two sort of juxtaposed positions, how they play out over time. And I wouldn't want us to be, you know, overemphasizing what's happening during the pandemic as something that somehow is going to carry on, because we don't know, is your point. And so I think you're absolutely right to identify, you know, being mindful about longer term pre-existing trends, and whether we see, you know, what's happened during the pandemic as being a kind of interlude, but then normal service resumes, don't know, but we should be at least alive to that. And I think that's, you know, that's a very good point that you make. In terms of your question on, in theory at least, obviously, you know, ultimately you have to be careful about, you know, overall numbers and sizes. But one of the things you can do with the data that we've been using is because you can do fairly fine-grained and small, flexible geographies. You know, you can identify the signals and allocate them by a postcode to, you know, to whatever geography you want. In theory, which was kind of what we were doing in Greater Manchester, you can look at whether Pudsey or Harrogate or, you know, whatever becomes the new, you know, dynamic hub of the, you know, the West Yorkshire economy in Leeds city centre declines. Who knows, right? I don't know about that. But in theory, you could do that. And so there's no reason why, you know, you couldn't map those changes and keep an eye on those changes over time. So I think that is possible, and I think that is an interesting area to explore. And then your other point is, I didn't really touch on it, but some of the work that we've been doing with Indeed, because, you know, their numbers are very large, they're collecting data across the country, then we're looking at specifics, is that you can do more work to look at jobs posted by industry, for example. And then you can see, okay, so, you know, some of the cities that have recovered the most, interestingly, you know, for example, they have larger than average warehousing and distribution activity. Now, you know, unsurprising, you know, that has been an industry that's grown through the pandemic, but they're also, you can, on the flip side, you can see, you know, some cities where the ability to work from home is bigger, Edinburgh or London, actually job postings are down. And that's kind of right in a sense, because people haven't lost their job, right? They've taken their job to another part of the country or to another part of the city, but they haven't lost their job. So there's no new job to be posted. So I think you can do a more finer grained analysis, which as the economy opens up, I think will be really interesting and insightful then to think about how that jobs demand is playing out. And as I was saying, one of the things we're certainly going to have to do is think about how those that are either unemployed currently or underemployed, or probably will become unemployed as furlough winds down, how we can help them match into industries or activities or jobs that are being generated, even if they're not in their current industry. And I think there's much more to be done on that as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Andrew. In the spirit of time, we're starting to get some questions, so we might have to provide quicker answers. So can I just ask Marianne to unmute herself? We've still got time for people to come online.
Hi, thank you very much, Andrew. That was really interesting. I'd missed your report on Manchester. Is that on your website?
Yeah, you can. If you go on and search it, Marianne, you'll be able to find it. We did it a couple of months ago, but we're just about to update it. But you can get that on the website.
And do you find that the places that have recovered better, like Wigan, the surrounding towns, there's less commuting out of those towns? And the point I made in my question was, have you looked at house prices to track recovery?
Yeah, so we're looking at trying to get good data on house prices and indeed rents at the minute, Marianne, to figure out, because when you look at some of the data that's been provided or produced by others, what seems to be happening, for example, in some of our cities, house prices are going up quite a bit, but rents are coming down, which is kind of interesting. I think it's partly maybe a transition from one to the next, and all of the rest of it. But that's one of the areas that we want to do. We want to do some more data to do some more data work on.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. We're down to 3 minutes.
Yep.
Margaret McAvoy, would you like to unmute yourself and convey your question, please?
Yes. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I just wondered if you had seen any link between the geographic data you presented on and the incidence of COVID-19 infections in different areas across the country.
Andrew, I'll give you max a minute on this.
Yeah, no, quite. Other than the work that I showed right at the beginning, Margaret, which is just sort of tracking COVID cases, in our different areas, we haven't done more work to look at the relationship between the COVID cases and then the sort of dynamics of that particular place. No, we haven't done more work on that. It's a good suggestion. Maybe it's something that we can take away and have a look at in a bit more detail.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Margaret. And just very quickly, Andrew, I think a couple of quick things I'd just throw into the pot for your consideration.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are one example that has a massive impact and a second order effect. So, for example, Heathrow Airport is one institution in the same, but the work I did with locals many years ago, over 800,000 jobs directly and indirectly were affected, and the jobs varied. So there are examples across the economy where a multifunctional item has a considerable direct and indirect effect. And the second one was, you may get lots of conflicting messages from indicators like the house prices, because
Yes.
you want to move out of the cities into the suburbs and the rurals and vice versa. So thank you very much, Andrew.
Good.
And also thank you very much to Jess for 2 very nice varied presentations to complete this session. We've got a 15-minute break, UK time, if people can come back for 2 o'clock. And I'll draw this session to a close a few seconds early. Thank you very much. Okay, bye.